Hello and welcome to Dungeon Master Talk, a podcast by Dungeon Masters for Dungeon Masters. I am Dungeon Master Shay.
And I'm Dungeon Master Kyle. How are you guys doing today?
Kyle, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fine.
Hey.
Can't complain too much, but that won't stop me.
So this episode will actually air right after Christmas and just before the new year. So to all you who have supported us for the last 6 months, we greatly appreciate you being with us for these last 6 months. We hope that 2022 was a good year for you. And if it wasn't, I hope that 2023 is a great year for you. And if you had a great year in 2022, I hope that it gets even better in 2023.
Seconded. Same goes for me.
That being said, though, guys, we just thank you so much for downloading this podcast. We appreciate you coming and joining us at our table to talk D&D and talking from a DM's perspective. We just would really appreciate if you would help us out by subscribing to we would really appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star review on your favorite platform, or if you have not subscribed to our podcast, if you would please do so. That would really help us in the algorithms for all the podcasting and helping to spread the word of Dungeon Master Talk out into the algorithms, the multiverse, whatever you want to call it. But
Podverse.
There we go. I like that. The Podverse. We're going to call it the Podverse. So, but again, thank you so much for being here with us this week. Kyle, what are we talking about this week?
Well, sir, I have an interesting question for you.
Okay.
And hopefully we can talk for an appropriate amount of time for it, not like 2 hours, 4 max. But, sir, as the DM, I'm not talking about players. I'm not talking about watching out for cheating at the table. That's a topic for another day, or multiple topics in the future that I'm sure we'll cover.
Mm-hmm.
But as the Dungeon Master, behind your screen in your little bubble, is it ever okay to fudge or lie about the outcome of a dice roll?
Yes, absolutely yes.
Okay, so if we're going for the stance of yes, so pretend for a second that I am not this illustrious, I'm teasing, of course, listeners, an experienced Dungeon Master. When are those situations? Because when you're getting started, there's a fine line. We have this interesting dynamic where traditionally at tabletop Dungeons and Dragons, your players roll out in the open.
Mm-hmm.
So in that traditional format, the world being the other players at the table, see those dice rolls. There's not really an opportunity for fudging. Dungeon Master, we're behind the screen. When is it okay for me to say, nah, that 1 is actually a 15, or that 20 is actually a 1?
I think it boils down to a couple of things. One, how straightforward do you want to be with your rolls, and how honest do you want to be? And the other thing is, how experienced are your players? I think part of that kind of plays, and both of those actually kind of play in together, to be honest with you. Let's just say, for example, you have a group of new players and they're low level, let's say 1 to 3, 1 to 5, somewhere in there. And for whatever reason that night, you cannot roll to save your life at all.
So any night that I'm the Dungeon Master?
I need to...
It's fact.
Again, as we've talked about before, we are not out to get the players. We are out to help build a story. Now,
yep.
I'm not saying that you should always fudge a dice roll, because it will be really easy to tell if you're rolling 3 or 4 or 5 nat 20s in a row for some reason. Now, if you do roll that much, you should probably buy a ticket if you're old enough and legal enough to do it wherever you're living. However, for the rest of us, if you do roll that, I mean, I would, honestly, if it was me, I would lift my screen to prove it, just to be like, hey guys, I'm sorry, it's happening. But on those nights, like, I'm not rolling very well, and let's just say I'm getting into a boss fight, right? Mm-hmm. I do want my boss to lay some hits. I would love to see my barbarian or my heavy hitters take a good smack every now and again. I would love to see my wizard actually get into the fight and actually take damage for a change, right? So it sounds like you're out to get your players, but really what you're doing is you're trying to create the scene for later. You're trying to set up either an animosity situation against the big bad, possibly, or like if you're in a like the end of the dungeon type fight, or like a big chapter marker in your story, I mean, I'm okay with fudging a number here and there just to make sure that I get a good hit. Or the flip side of that is, if you're, let's just say, like my suggestion in the beginning, if you're rolling high and you're hitting and you're hitting and you're hitting and you're hitting, do not one-shot your young players.
Don't take out the level ones with 5 straight 19s.
Exactly. That is a terrible idea. So
I'll never play again.
Well, it's very possible. But I think it's one of those things where if done correctly, just like a TPK, if done correctly, A, they won't notice, and B, it can create some good balance in your game.
I do think it's important to note that the book even kind of allows for this to a degree.
Yep.
Because for monsters, there's the average damage a lot of time, or the recommended damage.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something I have done. And so sorry to break the veil to any of my players who enjoy listening. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll roll those 5d6 I'm supposed to roll for the nice sound effect, but I'm going to just say the average damage.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's because I'm like, this isn't the fight for tonight. This is the warm-up. I'm doing this fight to get you guys to remember how to read your character sheets. So I'm not going to take the time to have this up. I already know the outcome. So I wonder if my players have caught on to this, because it's the times that it doesn't take me 10 seconds to add up the damage. I roll it and I go, that is and this much damage. And so that's the times I'm quicker on it. Now, it gets trickier, I think, because I think this topic really kind of lends into the fact that the screen is a tool for you, Dungeon Masters.
Yes.
Sometimes the best thing you can do as a DM is to just roll some dice.
Yep.
Your party's talking, and maybe it's really not the party's talking. 2 guys are talking. 2 guys are getting really chatty. The rest of your table, or if you're not on a physical table, the rest of your party on Roll20 or whatever you play over Discord, what have you.
Yep.
Are just sitting there. Their bubbles are not lighting up green. They're starting to check their phone. They're leaning back. One of your players gets up to go lay down on the couch. You want to introduce fun back into the group. Just roll some dice. It can be just because sometimes I'm just checking to see, is this D20 done being a brat and done rolling 1 through 5 exclusively? What that does, your players will instantly turn to look at you.
Usually, yes.
Yeah, if they hear it, it commands their attention. And so that's the key. They got to hear it. You got to notice it. So sometimes you got to pick it up and roll again and go, and start to look at something. Now you really got their attention because you're looking at it. But
go ahead.
I think with this, Shay, it's got to be a fine line, right? Because you don't want your players to start to think, his dice doesn't matter. He's just going to make it up. So I think kind of like what you're saying, if it's going to make a fight more interesting, early on in my campaign, I struggled with this. I struggled with balancing combat. And a lot of it is because I was trying to go, I think of most of our listeners, if you've been around with us for a bit, have heard that my campaign started with a pre-con, but we added another player. I used that as my launch pad, so we stuck to the pre-con for a little bit, then I started altering it slightly, and then we got into what's now my completely generated campaign, or self-created campaign.
Right.
And early on, that addition of that 6, I don't know if it was the addition of the 6 character, or if it was the fact that I am incapable of rolling decently with dice behind the screen. But there were several of my players, one in particular, but several of my players, I just couldn't hit them.
Yep.
Every time I'd go to try to hit them, I couldn't. Mm-hmm. And fights were kind of a breeze for the party. There was lots of jokes around it. People still seemed to have fun, but there was never that suspense in combat. The party was never. One time they were worried because it was the first or second session. They hadn't caught on yet that I couldn't hit them. Then there was 4 or 5 sessions in a row that they were like, "Oh, we got this. There's nothing to fear." To the point that when I had them run into a dragon, they were kind of like, "We can take it."
Well, and here's the thing: the law of averages, for some reason, is kind of like you're kind of like a slingshot. I think it's one of those things you're having all your bad rolls now, and it's just wait for it, pew, and then you're just gonna start hitting the crap out of us. But like we've said before, it's a fine line, really, when you boil it all down. Honestly, you're not out to get your players. You're out to create the environment and the suspense. And every now and again, it is okay to fudge a roll, to either automatically succeed or fail a throw. For me, and you were talking about rolling dice just for the heck of it sometimes, I actually do percentage dice when I do that, because that way I figure out the chances of an encounter happening. Like, oh, darn, you run into a blue dragon, roll characters.
That box in the corner was a mimic.
Do not.
The bathtub's alive.
The bathtub's alive, and do not sleep in the bed in the next room.
That is a reference.
Yes, folks, that was a mimic too. But yeah, for me, it's just like I said, it's one of those situational things where, if done correctly, A, it's not noticeable, and B, it's one of those things where it can save the game without everybody noticing it. And to be fair, I don't fudge my dice very often.
Yeah.
Like maybe 2% of the time I will fudge a roll. And again, based on the guidelines we just gave, if I'm rolling really well and I've got one of my low level characters that's about ready to bite it, I might lay a hit on him but not deal him as much damage. Or especially like for me, I have a no one dies until 5th level rule. So if they get close, or if I knock them out, I will immediately leave them alone and go for somebody else. Now, once they hit 5th level,
might be a finishing blow.
The gloves start coming off. Now, the thing with that, though, is if you're going to do that, there has to be a story-driven motive, like we talked about for TPKs, right?
Yep. Can't be out of the blue.
Yeah. So, like, if I have this villain that, for whatever reason, they have a vendetta with my rogue. For what, let's just say it was a personal vendetta, or somebody got robbed, they claimed that the rogue robbed them, or the rogue actually did rob them. We can't confirm or deny the allegation, but
rogues be rogue.
If they're solely out to take that rogue out, I could see that player, or that not that player, but that bad guy just gunning for that person. Okay. I can see that because there's motive. There's story driven motive for that happening. Yeah. If it's just like a band of thugs and one of them's just shellacking a character, if that one goes down, he'll probably go to the next credible threat that, somebody that's not going to chop his head off or try to eat him. But, at the same time, there has to be a reason. And if my dice try to interfere with that, I will adjust that to make sure that the gaming session and the story continues in a good flowing manner for everybody to stay together.
I'm going to jump a little side topic here.
Okay.
Because it's something that I just thought of while you're talking, and I've never done it as a DM.
Uh-oh.
When one of your rando villains, that's not the big bad, does down a character,
okay,
why don't we ever have them loot the character?
Usually because there's about 4 or 5 other people trying to eat them or beat them down. Okay, now
I think wouldn't that be interesting though? Because then now your character, you just got this little side vendetta.
That could be,
because there's several of my characters that if something got taken from them, they'd go on a manhunt.
Oh, hell would break loose. It would break loose. But
your character's staff, like if that got stolen,
if you took Dakar's staff with Thunder's head on top of it, oof.
Right? You'd like. One, I'm now hated by my party in the most fun way. And B, the in-game destruction that your character would go on.
No. I think what would happen, Dakar would break from the party just to go find that staff.
Yeah, like that's an interesting dynamic.
I'm going to tell you right now, that man would break off from the party. He would use every wild shape and every spell and every rage that he has in his body to get that staff back. Now, the reason for that, ladies and gentlemen, is because I also have I wrote a whole paper on the staff that he uses and the importance of it, and the fact that he took my best friend's life, and now I don't have the remembrance of my best friend's life anymore. So,
I've picked on Shay more than most other players. The only death in the party so far was his pet.
I always egg him on. He's like, "We're gonna roll. I'm gonna get you guys with my dice." I'm like, "Bring it!" And then usually he brings it, and I'm like, "Well, crap, I'm not rolling roll tonight either." So I'm in trouble.
It's not. I don't think it's that I bring it. It's just that you're the only one in the party that can match my ability of rolling terribly.
That is also fair.
We are the two we love D&D so much, and we are so bad at rolling dice.
Gary Gygax, why? Gary Gygax, why?
Great guy gags. Gary's little brother. No.
That's what it was. We're not going for Gary. We're going for his little brother. God, we're in trouble.
Yeah. So just throwing that out there, that was a sidetrack. Rolling it back. I love tangents though. Listeners, when Shay and I just talk, we normally accept one of us asks a question, the other one will answer completely off topic. We then talk for 40 minutes off topic, and then we'll answer the question. But now we don't remember what the question was, but we got the answer.
So your question of your intermediate villains, if they would ever loot a character. Okay.
Correct.
Here's my thought on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if they don't actually fight the party?
Just come in blind?
Hey, they all got to take a short rest sometime. They got to sleep sometime. Ooh. And if somebody fails a perception check, something could go missing.
You're an evil DM, but I love it. Dude, like, this is the type of stuff. So, listeners, okay, I'm going to stay off tangent here. We're going to stay off topic for a minute because I'm loving it. And then I'll bring it back. So I want to play devil's advocate, but I want to stay on this for a minute. If you pay attention to like TV shows, that's probably the thing that I like to look for most for how I drive my story arcs, because it's long-term. It can be long-term storytelling that like long-form storytelling payoffs can happen seasons later. But you need to have those immediate payoffs too. The episode has to be good. That's your session. The season has to be good. That's like your like 1 year or 2 year cycle. You want to have something big happen in it. Each of those, they have this thing called filler, where it's like an episode that really, like, you can have cool character growth, but it's not going to drive the mainline plot.
Right.
And in D&D, I've had filler for us, and to give me time to write. When it's like the party progress or they skip something, I'm not ready. Filler, like, I made a Las Vegas on a boat type thing for my party to give me filler. It actually filled too much time. Couple extra sessions from what I imagined.
True.
But then this is like the easiest way to do a filler, and to have a hook. Now you got to steal something that they'll want to go after. Like if I just steal one of my rogue's daggers, he's gonna be like, okay.
Well, it probably depends on which. Like if you have a magical dagger, that's one thing. You know. Yeah. But like
the wizard's +2 staff would probably be something you'd go after, or willing to spend at least a little bit looking, and then you got to give them clues to chase.
True. Or like if you have, well, because I know you've talked about this in our episodes before, but like our rogue has a shiny, right? If that shiny went missing again, now great, I don't think we have any of the shinies right now, but if he would have gotten robbed while he was sleeping, that would have set him off, right?
My legitimate fear for doing that, talking a little bit of session, so listeners get an idea of my players here. That rogue is likely to go on a mass murder spree. Just as likely to as any villain. The only thing that keeps him on the side of the good is the rest of the party. It ain't nothing to do with his conviction.
Y'all can't see me because this is an audio podcast, but I'm like preaching for the people in the back. Like I'm like agreeing with him like full-heartedly on this.
Yep. He has killed for what he calls diplomacy.
It's true.
Yeah, like that's why I didn't do that to him there. But I'm just thinking because it's like, hey, I've had those random encounters, and I've had players go down or close to down.
Yeah.
And what I've always done in the past for me is, this is not a main line deal. You know, some diversion. The guy's going to attack over here now, or something like that. Pull them off that character, save their life, because this isn't where they're meant to die.
Yeah.
Like, 'cause I don't. My rule, I've kind of gone gloves off ever since level either 3 or 4, because we had a good number of sessions. Players started to feel connected. The buy-in was there. I wasn't in search of that buy-in anymore. I don't want them to die in like a random encounter I made because I thought things got stale, or because I wanted them to remember how to look at the character sheets. If it's a like dungeon that's not against the main bads, but it's a part of the mainline story, and they die there, that's unfortunate, but that would happen. But if it's like, I made this encounter because it's been a couple months, I want my players to remember how to look at their character sheets again, I'm not going to feel good about a death there.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is if for whatever reason you are rolling well and you have a campaign, kind of bringing this back full circle.
Yep.
Like if you have a boss fight or a mid boss fight and the party just gets wrecked, right? If you're playing by the rules, and you didn't fudge anything, great. That's great. For story purposes, if you roll well enough to knock your party out, not kill them, there's a difference. If you don't kill them, but you just knock them all out, and you loot their bodies, I could totally see that happening. Like that could be story driven as well.
I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate here and argue for the other side. So wouldn't fudging the dice rolls as the DM, you're behind the screen, isn't that like the dealer stacking a deck in a game of cards?
Okay, well, first of all, the house always wins. So whether they stack the deck or not, the house always wins.
So the dungeon master should always win. I've been playing this completely wrong.
Again, it's one of those things where if you're a purist, like a D&D purist, and you take everything by the book literally as it's written, then you would never ever fudge a roll.
That's fair.
That's like straight up. You would never ever fudge a roll. And again, like we said, I'm not advocating that you do this on a regular, consistent basis to where it's not even worth rolling dice anymore. I think it's one of those things where, and I think a lot of DMs actually don't roll behind screens anymore just for that openness, that kind of accountability, if you will, from the players. Now, you get some groups where they're experienced enough and people will like you'll roll, let's just say a 10, and then the DM will say 15 to hit. Like that, some of those players will start picking up, oh, this monster has a +5 to hit, a +3 to hit, like blah, 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 blah. Yep. So, and that's if you're rolling out of the open. If you're wanting to keep the monster stats or the bad guy stats completely concealed, then yeah, you would roll behind the screen. But again, it's one of those things where if done correctly, it's not going to impede your game, but it can add some tension and some extra flair if you do it right.
So the reason I was asking this is because the reason I wanted to cover this is our last session, I was very tempted one time to fudge about a dice roll.
Do it.
And I chose not to in that moment purely because I never had before.
Do it.
It's not. And Shay will attest, I am not a rules purist. In fact, I'd be willing to bet listeners that several of you know the rules better than I do, the official ones. I know the rules that my party's gone by. Now, that might not be true for a lot of listeners because I've read the PHP, I've read the Dungeon Master Guide, and I've listened to a lot of live plays. I've listened to a lot of people talk D&D. I've been talking D&D myself for a long time before this podcast. But I'd be willing to bet that there are listeners who know the rules better than me. So I'm by no means a rules purist, but when I chose not to do it, is this purely because, like, in the moment, I was just kind of like, It's funny. The outcome there, I thought, this is going to be fun either way. I'm just going to trust the dice. The dice, I feel, sometimes know better than me. It's just amazing how often that ends up being the best thing. But I was tempted purely because I was like, man, I was really rooting for the other outcome. It's me, DM, really wanted the other thing. And I think my kind of self-lesson there is it was like, hey, the story isn't my story anymore. I built the blocks. Yeah. But then also sometimes it's okay to not leave it up to a dice roll, even though this game is so heavily based off dice, to have a scenario come to pass. Harken back to you said a lot of people, don't roll behind screens anymore. I like to for one reason and one reason only. Again, it's not that I like to fudge my dice. It's the suspense of it. I really like mystery, that kind of defining trait. And then also the screen that Shay gave me has a bunch of cool, useful stuff on it, and I have taken advantage.
That's true.
That is really useful.
You talk about this in my last couple of sessions, which, by the way, don't let me forget, we need to go over sessions. The last couple of sessions we've had, I've actually had one of my third-party friends actually do the rolling for me. So therefore, I'm not technically guilty of what happens. And the funny part about that is in one of our last fights, they rolled basically like 3 or 4 nat 20s in a row, and we had to confirm them. I mean, straight up.
That is insane. Is that a power one can learn?
Yes, it's called convince your friend that's not into D&D to come sit at the D&D session.
Okay. But you have to keep...
You gain a +5 to diplomacy and advantage on charisma checks. And once per month, you can cast this on a non-D&D player to be entranced to come sit with you and your party for up to 5 hours. Somebody please write this down.
you need to have infinite friends, though, to keep capitalizing on that new player dice energy, because that's real. It's like beginner's luck.
No, because the effect wears off after 24 hours, and then you get to recast it after the next month. But
and they still technically have never played D&D, so they still have the new player energy.
Exactly.
You're cheating the Cosmoverse.
Yeah, I mean, I probably just blew up the podverse at some point, when I said something. But here's the thing: I do all the modifiers, I do all the attacks, all that stuff. All they do is literally pick the dice up, put it in the dice tower, and tell me what it says. That's all they basically or they show me what they rolled. Basically, that's all they do.
Wow.
Yeah, I get to introduce D&D to a third party. I don't actually kill my players, and my players can't get mad at me for rolling nat 20. So,
but this new friend is instantly the enemy of the party, so that's only bummer.
And therefore, I'm not the bad guy.
Welcome to our friend group. They're gonna hate you when you do good and hate you when you do bad. You can only fail. Hello.
Oh shoot.
Yeah. So I think like we're both in consensus. Again, listener, and this is not me lying to sound good to my party. They know my shortcomings as a DM by now. It's been a few years. So I think we're both in consensus that it is okay so long as it's not your default. It can't be regular.
Absolutely.
I think there's select times that it is, and it's that fine line. And so my advice, if you feel yourself questioning it, you're like, will I feel guilty for this later? Then go with the dice. But if you're like, this battle's boring and I just rolled my 4th straight 6, maybe that 6 was really a 15 and you're good to go.
Now, I will say this. The one last thing I want to put on this before we go into last sessions. If you're rolling, and let's just say that your bad guy is on like the brink of death, right? If he's on the brink of death, and let's just say the druid or the cleric or somebody cast an area of effect spell where they have to do a save, if they legitimately fail that, let the players have that win, and you can show them too. Be like, I legitimately rolled and he failed or she failed. Like, give your players the satisfaction of the fact they beat them fair and square. Okay.
Yeah.
Again, we're not advocating to do this on a regular basis, because otherwise you could just leave your dice where they were and not even open them up. But if it's one of those things where you absolutely need to for play purposes or for story purposes, I have no problem with it. So, your thoughts?
I agree with that. I don't know if you remember this, but at one point, this was a few years ago now, I had a character that I had introduced that was a bad guy that the party interrogated, and then the bad guy tried to get away. Like, I was dead set. I had so much written for this character. I had big plans, listeners. No, it wasn't Jerry. I did not have big plans for Jerry. You guys let Jerry go. Jerry got to live. He's the one that had no plans for, and he got to live. So now I'm trying to figure out life. But this character, you guys interrogated him, and he goes to get away, and the archer decides to shoot a bow at him. Like, all right, that's fine. I'm going to let you do that, because I've always said that my rule is, if it makes sense logically, I'll allow it. But if it makes no logical sense, I won't. But it made sense. Our archer was an expert archer. He'd be able to snap that out and get a shot off. He natty 20s. All right, roll damage. And it was something like 18 damage. And I was like, whew, near death. All right. I was like, you hit him good. He's hurt, but he's at the door and he's heading out, because I'm like, I really wanted to live. And then my wizard's like, I cast Fireball.
I remember this.
And I'm like, all right. I was like, what happens? I think that was the one I had to do a save. And I don't remember how Fireball works. I think that was the one I had to save. But I also rolled for it hits regardless.
That's an attack spell.
Yep.
But
so I was like, oh no, he hit. All right, roll damage, and it was like 11. And I was like, crap, he's down.
Nope, he's going. Like, he's just singed. He's running. He's hurt like heck, but he's not dead.
Yeah. So I was like, oh crap, he'd actually be down. I was like, ugh. No, I was like, all right, he's really hurt now. He's like really toasty. And our other warrior was like, our cleric was like, I throw my axe. And I was like, all right, he's not a ranged fighter, surely. Natty 20.
I remember that.
and then he hit for 18 damage. I was like, we've more than doubled the life of this guy.
He's dead.
And I was like, he's dead. I was like, clearly the dice had chosen that character did not pass that day.
Yep.
And I did lie about his life once to keep him alive.
I tried to give you a shot, Tom, and you just blew it.
So, session updates. Shay, how are things going in your playgroup?
So we've actually had 2 sessions that I keep forgetting to talk about. So, listeners, I do apologize for that. So, since we've moved into the new studio, yet to have an actual official name, we've had 2 sessions, and one of the sessions our sorcerer had to miss. The party ended up finding some stolen goods from the homeland of the cleric. Unbeknownst to them, how they got there, given that the route that those were supposed to be traveling were miles and miles and miles away from where they found it, but they found them nonetheless. Anyway, the warden that they had tried to keep the other people from finding ended up being a sea hag with 2 trolls as their bodyguard.
Oh.
And so they made a deal with the party to have safe passage out of the dungeon for a deal to be made later.
Ooh.
So as they're doing this, that's where we killed that session. And then the next session, the sorcerer got to come back, and then they picked him up and they told him what happened. It's like, oh, to heck, we are not making a deal with this fool. So they basically went back in there, killed the warden, killed the trolls.
What full murder party, murder hobos.
They're trying to figure everything out, but he was like, I'm not making no deal with no hag. And then the sorcerer and the rogue, who are sneaky people in the party, tried to open a locked door. Well, the sorcerer rolled a nat 1 and the rogue rolled like a 15. So they kind of went like Scooby-Doo and Shaggy and kind of fell into this door where 6 bad guys were waiting for them. Like classic Scooby-Doo and Shaggy. It was hilarious. Yeah. And so like, zoinks! And then they ran away. The sorcerer casts illusion. The guards run right past him. They can't find him. And then, yeah, that's basically what happened. So,
sounds like a fun session.
Yeah, it was great.
So, for my update, listen, I honestly don't know if I gave this update last time or not, because I can't remember now what I've said. My playgroup has not played since October.
Yep, we were in 3 different places the last I remember.
The latest update, the core group that was under the mountain, of the wizard, the cleric, Shay's character, and one of our warriors. They made their way into the city finally. So it's underground underneath the mountain. And then beneath that city, under the mountain, there was mines. Beneath those mines was a secret hidden city that they traveled up through. So they finally get up there. They meet governing dwarves. Once again, don't ask for their names because that's how my party does things. And I plan names, so they naturally don't ask for them. They negotiated their right to stay, basically, and they notified the city about the refugees down in the tunnels from the now captured city that was out on the coast of Theronseed that is now captured. So they are now in the city under the mountain, talking to them. They've decided that they are going to go research and search for the Onyx of Omnipotence, the gem of power that they are seeking. And then flash over to the rogue halfling. He met his goddess yet again because he ran into the former champion of that goddess, and they had a battle. The goddess then intervened, chose our rogue halfling as her true champion, and eviscerated his rival, and then granted him a ring that will allow him to, at the expense of all his life energy, instant knockout for him, to consume the soul of a person of his choice, basically.
Oof.
On her behalf. But she informed him that this item is only to be used on select people, so she gave him a list of people that he was not allowed to use it on, or he'd face her wrath, and a list of people he was to use it on, or he would face her wrath. And interestingly enough, one of our party members is on the list of do not use it on, and so is the main big bad and several of his allies. And then several members of the party are on the list of people to use that ring on. And then he was then left in a near dead state at the gate of the city under the mountain. Mm-hmm. So he is unconscious, but near the bigger part of the party. And then off overseas,
Mm-hmm.
3 other members of the party are in that warrior village I talked about. Well, that warrior kingdom I talked about.
Yep.
In the past. And we caught up with basically the other druid, our elven druid. She has won a family, and so she's negotiated life with her new wife. And that was a really interesting and fun role play.
It was.
And they've also decided to head to the library. So this is going to be a really riveting session when we get back together. We're going to role play some library time twice. Yeah, I do plan on doing that. And
you realize nobody's going to actually do that, though, right?
Oh no, they're going to do that. And so I'm not like there. I don't know how the library stuff's going to go. They're both researching for different stuff. How both parties arrived at that, I didn't foresee it coming. So I was really glad that we were at time so that I could plan out what on earth they would find in a library.
Oh, man. Good times. Well, guys, thank you guys so much for joining us this week. We actually, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't sure how long we were going to go on this topic of fudging dice rolls, but Kyle convinced me, and we made I think it was a good discussion. So let us know what you think. If you have any funny dice fudging stories, if you have never fudged a dice roll in your life and want to tell us about it, please contact us. We have social media. We have our email at dungeonmastertalk@gmail.com. We are on Twitter at DMT the podcast, and you can also use the hashtag Dungeon Master Talk to tag us there. And we also have the Dungeon Master Talk page on Facebook. So again, we would just really love to connect with you guys and listen to those stories and interact with you as we continue this journey of this podcast. So again, thank you for supporting us. We would love it if you would subscribe if you haven't done that already. If you would help us share the message of this podcast with your friends, that would mean the world to us here at DMT. So for all of us at DMT, I am Shay.
And I'm Kyle.
And this is Dungeon Master Talk.
Bye, guys.